Okay, hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Innovations in Education. My name is Kevin Hogan. I'm editor at large for eSchool News, and I'm glad you have found us in this series. I hope you're enjoying them. With me today, I have Matt Reynolds. Matt is the Assessment and Data Officer at Douglas County School District in the great state of Colorado. Matt, how are you?
Great, just doing fantastic. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation.
Well, I really appreciate your time. As I was mentioning before the podcast started, I've been doing these twice a month since June, kind of following the conversations of how school districts have been responding to the pandemic and looking at different aspects of it. One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you specifically is because of your title in terms of assessment and data, and how those two things work when school districts are in the middle of a pandemic, amongst many of the other things that have been disrupted. Assessment and the use of data, which is always top of mind for more innovative districts in the country. Even some of those districts had to kind of put those things on the back burner just in order to get kids connected and try to set up some sort of remote sensibility. So as we get started, maybe you can just give us a little sense of where you are, where Douglas County is, your size, and maybe a little kind of a backgrounder of, a year ago, where were you when all this madness started, and how has your district responded to the situation?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the conversation. Assessment and data is always a fun conversation for me to talk about, for sure. I currently work in Douglas County. We're just south of the larger Denver metro area. We have about 65,000 students in our system, and we have a fairly good mix of both charter and neighborhood schools in our system. And we have really been, just like everywhere else across the country, been experiencing all different phases of this pandemic. We've had institutions of really all different phases of learning, the learning modalities, from full remote to e-learning options to hybrid to full in-person. We've really seen it all, and we've really done it all in the last 12 months, which has really made it interesting for us to plan and prepare. The one thing about a pandemic is it really has you reevaluate what your priorities are, as you just mentioned. Some of the projects that we had going at the time are no longer up on our agenda. And one of the things I never thought that I would do in a million years in my title would be looking at COVID data and monitoring that from the number of quarantines, the number of positive tests, to now, which is a great thing, looking at the number of staff that are getting their vaccinations. And so there's that other label of the title that it's not necessarily the focus of your conversation here, but it's just that kind of speaks to the levels of shifts that we've had to do in terms of our overall data needs. Assessment has been very interesting as well. I think we see that across the nation and in our state, that with the pause of assessments from last spring, that made it really interesting for us to determine what was the impact of COVID, what was the impact of the pandemic on student learning, because we had an entire school year worth of buildup, and the pandemic hit us, around the same time it did for the rest of the country in March, which we had a full quarter left. And so, we were really anxious to see what was the fruits of our labor for that year. And with having no assessment occur, and rightfully so, just based on where we were at that time,
Sure.
we didn't get that data. We were able to execute and get some data from local sources. A lot of the same sources that teachers use to inform their work. And at that time, teachers were really scrambling, schools were really scrambling, and so were we, just to adjust to going from full in person to a full remote stance.
Yeah.
And so data collection became really a secondary conversation to us, because we were trying to really focus in on engaging students in learning.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that shift. I mean, I'm assuming you're an innovative district in the first place if there is even a person with your title on staff. I talk to a lot of districts that don't even have that sort of proclivity to be doing that sort of analysis. But I will I'll take a leap and say that maybe you guys weren't necessarily prepared for a pandemic when it came to shifting from in person into a fully remote or hybrid situation. And how were you able to kind of adjust to that?
Yeah, if you think of the evolution from even January to March, was an incredible shift. Where people were thinking, well, this is going to be a 2-week thing. To wait a minute, we're closing schools down for in-person learning for the rest of the year. It was very, very quick response, and I would really have to give credit to really our school staff, our parents, and our students on just how quickly we were able to make some adjustments. We literally handed out thousands of devices for our students to be able to do online learning. We handed out hotspots for families to be able to conduct online learning. Many of our partners, our local partners, whether it's our wireless providers and some of our other business partners, really chipped in and helped us make that transition. And it was really, really fast. I mean, we went from this idea of doing a remote stance to, wait a minute, we're going to be doing remote for the rest of the year. And I would say, from a person, we really had some great people step in and help. Our parents were very understanding. They were faced with the same issues at home. So how do I teach our children at home? And our teachers and staff members and school leaders were just so responsive last year, and all the credit to them that we were able to shift that quickly. But to your original question, I don't think anybody was truly prepared for the level of impact that COVID did have on our system.
Yeah. From the data perspective, you talked about your new duties in terms of collecting vaccination data, things like that. Were there other examples of that this past year, that data sets that you never believed that you would be collecting BP or before the pandemic?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few, and it's not just new data, but also a shift in how you would look and interpret the data. Engagement became a very, very large conversation in the spring. Is as you completely shift from being in person to remote, it's how do we look at capturing data that would give us a window into engagement?
Yeah.
Engagement's a really difficult thing for us to measure directly. So it's about taking different data sets and collecting them together to paint a picture of what we look at in terms of engagement, whether that's the logins that people have and that students have on an online environment, the number of engagements that they have with their teachers, whether that's through email or phone calls, the Google meetings, which at that time was a fairly new phenomenon of being able to engage, and also what's our outreach plan from every one of our schools to reach those students. And that was a fairly big shift for us in terms of making it so that the engagement was really the focus for us. It was shifting away from just the performance to saying, are we engaging kids in this new educational approach? Moving into this year, engagement was still a conversation, but we started to get our sea legs underneath us, for lack of a better word, to say, how can we start looking at the way that students are learning in this environment, which became really, really, really challenging for us. Looking at some of our online providers for curriculum resources to ask questions about how can we get a window into what students are doing, how they're doing, and really assessment in and of itself became a very interesting concept, because we often don't realize how much informal data we get from the day-to-day operations with students, and the value of that data. And right now, the value of not having that data is tremendous. The informal assessment moves that our teachers make each and every day on an informal assessment basis really has become so critical because we don't have those large-scale data sets that we normally do to check in with students.
Right.
Our district is fully implemented iReady as part of our package for monitoring student performance in reading and math. And we have leveraged that for a great deal of the work that we do, because it is something that we can administer. It is something that we can get a good window of opportunity and get large scale participation. And even that has been challenging. We did our first fully remote administration of iReady in December, which that's a major shift from just your standard um, mode of administering a test to now you're doing something fully remote. So the discussions that followed was, how do we interpret that data in light of the fact that the kids are taking it at home, they're not being monitored. So what do you do with that data? So
Right.
it's been a challenge all the way around.
And when you talk about those large data sets, are you talking about the state testing that normally would have happened this past spring?
Yeah, it's, when you consider the amount of testing that we have for kids, we test just based on both state and federal law. We test them, whether it's English language learners or whether it's just your normal standardized assessments for English language arts, math, science, social studies. In our high schools, we have the College Board Suite for PSAT 8, 9, 10, and SAT. We were able to execute AP testing in the spring with their modifications to going fully online. And then again, you had to look at that data and what does that mean to shift online, and how do you interpret that data and work with that data, because it's a new modality for them to take the test. And this fall we did a few of administrations of College Board. We did an SAT and we did a PSAT as an opt-in for our kids who missed in the spring.
Mm.
And those kids, those who were able to come in and take the test, then you had to interpret in light of not having all kids take the test.
So with that, and through these experiences, talk a little bit. Have you discovered any innovations or any thoughts of like, well, geez, maybe this is the way we should have been doing it in the first place, or any other sort of surprises as you've implemented this brave new world to where you think you may use once the madness ends?
Yeah, I think that there are some things that we will carry forward. This idea of meeting and working with students remotely, we'd always kind of flirted with this idea. And now that you see it fully and our teachers are very, very creative with how they approach, using breakout rooms with some of these video platforms and things like that, of being able to connect to kids. And I really do think that the approaches that we see just on the distance learning side of things with remote learning, I do think that we're going to be applying those more to expand our learning beyond the walls of a classroom or beyond the walls of a school building, to be able to branch out our kids and to reach out beyond and make connections. Some of our teachers are connecting with people from across the globe and bringing those people in because you can do it seamlessly. And it's like that person is just on the video call with them and they're bringing in these people to have those conversations. There's certainly a change in how you monitor engagement. That's certainly been a learning curve. But there are certain things with how we work with our students on the online environment that we certainly think that we'll be moving forward in a different direction. On top of that, when you think of how we as adults interact with one another, we have found that professional development opportunities, depending on what the subject is, we've seen more people take advantage of it because it's online and it's just easier for them to access, because if they've got children at home, they're able to jump on and join one of our professional development opportunities at night more seamlessly if it's not in person. And so I think there are going to be flavors of this normal, as it were, right now, that are going to continue beyond this year.
Right. I mean, I just spoke with the folks in Kershaw County down in South Carolina in terms of special ed, and in terms of getting those various stakeholders together. Sometimes you would need 8 people in a physical room at the same time in order to discuss a particular student, which could sometimes take weeks. And now it just can happen in a day. And it might happen 4 times a day, right? As a result of the synchronous technologies. Well, let's get back to the data a little bit more. With that lack of data sets, you said that you had to rely upon some of your own collections. Can you get it into the weeds there a little bit? I mean, in terms of the specifics, what did you do? What sort of action points did you take away from these new data point collections?
Well, I think the greatest thing that there's always a silver lining, and I'm an optimistic person, and so you try to find really the silver lining to any situation. And one of the things right now is, you're assessing for what purpose? It's assessing to find out information about your students, but then to that root question of why are we gathering this data? And now we're in a position where you're missing some of those large data sets that really only give you a snapshot at a certain point of time in that particular modality at that time of year. And so now you're talking to teachers and you're talking to school leaders about, well, what's the ongoing data that you use to inform your instruction? So rather than looking at the assessment, which is assessment for accountability purposes and that summative side, you're now looking more towards that formative assessment side to really ask teachers in the moment, what is the most useful for you? And what is going to give you the most information about where your students are in the moment? And really helping them branch out to say, okay, there's some online options for you to gather data and utilize some self-reflections that students have to be able to gather the data that you want. And it's all about the challenge of talking to folks and saying, you know what, we understand the challenge. You don't have them face to face. So really, let's narrow what your focus is in terms of gathering data so that you can really make it meaningful, you can make it make sense, and you can also use it effectively and efficiently. We have, our buildings that are really using some creative ideas and some of our teachers regarding their assessment practices, whether it's really informal assessment and student reflections that I think is really the most exciting piece of it. I often have the opportunity to present large scale data to various stakeholder groups. While that data is not as complete as it typically is, on the other side of the informal data that's being collected, we have much richer conversations because people really have to reflect on what they're doing with students.
Right, right. Talk a little bit about the perception of your work. Before the pandemic, BP, that I like to call it, as well as now we're in DP during the pandemic. I mean, not knowing your district specifically, but there are other districts where people have struggled to communicate the value of data, and whether that meant implementing a big student information system or some sort of other expensive solution that involves data analytics that would have to go in front of a school board, and you'd have people we used to call them thwatties, like, this is the way we always did it, why we don't need this newfangled stuff, we know our kids, we know our things. I don't know if that was your situation before. It sounds like things were pretty progressive before, but has there been a shift in a mindset of the importance of using data and using assessment data in order to carry the kids through this situation?
Yeah, I think, Douglas County matches the nationwide conversation regarding large scale assessment. Right now, the conversation, both locally and on a national level, is yes, we want to know where students are, but are we willing to sacrifice instructional time, which is so precious to us right now, to gather that information? Because many of those assessments do take time away from the learning. And so that conversation has continued. It's reached a different pitch now because the instructional time is just so valuable to us at the moment that yes, we want to know, but we also want to utilize every minute of every day to provide instruction for students, because we have been in and out of this, physical, online, hybrid model all year long. And so that has certainly changed the conversation for us. But it really comes down to that conversation about purpose. What's the purpose of assessment? What's the purpose of data? I have really found that if you're able to have a conversation with someone about the purpose and use of data, it really diffuses the conversation, and it really focuses our energy to make sure that when we gather information that we're actually using it.
Well, I have to say that usually I try to wrap up these conversations asking for a glass half full prognostication. So maybe I'll ask that of you. I mean, when you look at the vaccines that are coming out, and you look at the hopefulness that there may be back to normal, this fall to whatever degree normal means. Talk a little bit about your further work and how you see data continuing to advance the way that we assess and support students as a result of what we've just kind of gone through.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think the light is at the end of the tunnel. We really do see, with vaccinations coming out and with the community data that we have, the spread is minimizing, it's going down. All of that points to, some really great things in the future. Our district is really committed to professional learning communities. And at the heart of the professional learning communities is utilizing data to make informed decisions about instruction. Knowing what you want students to know and be able to do, and then gathering the information to make decisions beyond that point. And we really are going to try to take as much as advantage of this as we can, because now that we've stripped back, all of the ancillary things that we've been doing down to just the core of what do we want students to know and be able to do, and build upon that next year. Professional learning communities are nothing new in Douglas County. It's just an opportunity for us to reinvigorate the conversation, refocus the conversation, and use some of the things that we've learned in the last year to help grow kids. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I appreciate your time. I think we dug up a number of insights that our audience will really be able to take a hold of and implement in their own district. So I appreciate that. And thank you for the work that you do. It's hugely important, especially during this time. And I know that the parents in Douglas County appreciate your work as well.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate your continued work of reaching out to different districts and plucking and picking brains and getting these ideas together. It's great. It's great for all of us to learn from one another.
And hopefully at some point we'll be able to do this once again in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks again. And thanks everybody for watching. And please click around and look for the next episode of Innovations in Education. I'm Kevin Hogan.